And we are in chaos at the moment. We are in that in-between space. And so every time we step forward to share stories of freedom and togetherness and joy and nourishment, we are literally weaving the fabric of the collective global story. So for all of you listening to this, if you are having any kind of hesitation about coming forward with your story, please know that if you do work that creates coherence in the world, we need your voice and we need your story.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Conscious Marketer podcast. This is Richard here. Hi, Kylie. How are you doing today?
Good.
And today we are pleased to present you with Vena Ramphal. She is a classical Indian dancer turned leadership coach. That's super interesting. She teaches leaders to cultivate stage presence and deliver their story and message with authentic authority. And she's made tons of appearances on the BBC, Sky News, as well as many print publications such as GQ, Cosmo, the Financial Times, and Psychologies Magazine. Hi, Vena. Welcome to the Conscious Marketer podcast.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Kylie. I'm really delighted to be here with you.
Happy to have you. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the power of your personal story and also how it relates to conscious movement. And when we say conscious movement, we mean physical movement, kind of how you express yourself through your body, which is super exciting. And if you're listening on audio, you might want to go onto YouTube and watch this episode because later she may do some demonstrations as well. Vena, we ask everybody to kind of start with a little bit of how you got into doing what you're doing and a little bit of your origin story. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to. So my life in a way kind of started with dance, with movement. I remember I would have been about 5 or 6 when I witnessed my first classical Indian dance performance. And I remember seeing these 2 performers. It was a couple on the stage in their extraordinary costumes and makeup. And I had this moment that I can only describe as recognition. There was this sense of recognition. And in that moment, my life was set. So I started going to dance classes. I asked my mother to take me to dance class, and she did. And I've never had this relationship with dance of where I've wanted it. It's never been this question of setting a goal and wanting this performance or wanting to achieve that. Because there was this sense of recognition, it's like everything has just sort of blossomed out of that. And that gave me that connection with conscious movement, gave me, I think, a very visceral worldview, a very visceral way of experiencing life, which I wasn't at all aware of at the time. I only became aware of it much, much later when I realized that that wasn't the way that everybody experienced the world. It was something that had really been gifted to me through dance. So I've always been seeking to understand self and our human condition through the body and through movement. And that's really what continues to be the thread that pulls me forward.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think a lot of people in the digital age, they may not appreciate how much the body informs what they're saying, and I just share a quick story and then back to you, but I did a photo shoot this last weekend, and the photographer was quite well known here in Europe, and he does a lot of shoots with like professional models for the big magazines like Vogue and stuff. And he didn't take that many photos, but he goes, okay, here you're this way. And he said, here you're leaning back, and this is more pensive, and this is more active. And here, I don't really know what that means. And he was kind of interpreting the body language in all these different areas. And I think when we get on YouTube or we're on a Zoom call or working with a client, often we don't know how our posture, our stance actually informs what we're trying to say. Could you talk a little bit about, how dance trains you so that you can use your body a little bit more intentionally for the outcome?
Absolutely. So I remember, this is going back a little while ago, I was teaching, this is several years ago actually, I was teaching a group of schoolgirls, a dance class. And it was quite an exclusive, unusual school that was focused very much on drama and literature and the arts. And so it was a small group of girls, and we had a fantastic time. I was teaching them, hand gestures and particular kinds of movement to be expressive and so on. And a couple of days later, I had a conversation with their teacher, and she said to me, I don't know what you did with them in that class, but there's this one girl, I'll call her Charlotte today. There's this one girl, Charlotte, and she, after your class, she started using vocabulary that she's never used before. She's always struggled with literature in the past. She's struggled in English classes. But something you did in that dance class, she just started using more sophisticated vocabulary. And I was delighted, but not at all surprised, because that vocabulary was always in her brain. But it took the physical movement of her body to make it available to her. So there is very much this direct link between how we comport the body and what becomes available to us in our lingual space, in our lingual capacity, but also our thought space and our emotional state. So when I'm talking about conscious movement, it's about doing two things. The first thing is to cultivate more coherence in the body, a greater sense of symmetry, where everything is held together. That feeling when your body flows and you feel grounded, but you also feel like everything's available to you. You're ready to go. So, before I get on stage, before, for example, I came onto this call, I was moving in the space behind me and moving in a way to simply allow the body to relax, to be free, so that the lymph fluids flow more freely. When you move, it allows your brain to operate in a different way. So bringing that sense of coherence is extremely important. But the other thing that we can use conscious movement to do is actually to cultivate a particular quality, a particular type of emotional state, and even to connect you with your own story and to unlock that story. Because I know that often when people, in your kind of space, in the marketing space, and people who are, I'm going to say, conscious creators, heart-centered creators who want to bring something good into the world, they are seeking, how do I tell my story, or how do I tell a story in a good way? And I think people can often get stuck in uncovering the different layers of their story. And I've found that using movement with the intention of unpeeling those layers and discovering something different is incredibly powerful.
Can you talk about all this in relation to an origin story? That's kind of my thing. I teach origin story, and I've never even considered bringing the body piece into it. So I'm very, very curious about how that all works.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. I love this question. Okay. So the origin story that I usually use, because it was the most organic thing for me, when I started coaching, when I trained to become a coach and I started coaching people, I had gone through a period in my life where I chose to complete a marriage and get a divorce. So for a couple of years, I had been through this extremely difficult, dark night of the soul, where I wanted to stay in that marriage. I wanted this to be forever. But I knew that I was moving further and further away from myself. And there came a point where it was like a fork in the road moment. I knew that if I looked 10 years ahead, if I stayed in that marriage, my soul would slowly have died. And so I made the decision to complete the marriage and to leave. Now, what arose out of that was this extraordinary coming home to myself in my body, coming home to my own identity. And it resulted in freedom, in great freedom. And it's in a way, that's really what I'm interested in teaching people and guiding people into, is discovering their own freedom. Okay, so that's my origin story that I often use. Now, there are many, many different ways in which I could tell that. I just told it in the way that came out today, but sometimes I could tell it in a way that emphasizes the fact that the most difficult thing for me actually was telling my parents, right? It was that sense of what will they think, what will they feel? And actually they had a really, really bad reaction. So there's that part of the story. And so that part of the story is about feeling really resourced in myself, resourced in my body, having this sense of plenitude and being self-sufficient. If I think about the clarity, the way I told it just now, this fork in the road moment, that maybe is to do with clarity. That's to do with, how do I make that choice in that moment? So the way that I would say that you can use your body to and use conscious movement to unlock all of this is, if I was to give you the word clarity, we can all do this now. Let's think of take the word clarity and the notion of having clarity of purpose, clarity in yourself, clarity in what you're doing. And if you think about your origin story now, the story that you use most often, and then if you drop your awareness into your body, if you're sitting down, just make sure you've got your feet flat on the ground and that you feel really comfortable in the body. You can close your eyes and very intuitively just allow your body to start moving with this notion of clarity percolating through. So just keep this sense of clarity in mind as you allow your body to move. And let your mind become aware again of your story through this lens of clarity. Notice what comes up, and then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay, so that's a very, very kind of soft, introductory, intuitive practice, but it gives you a sense of how you can actually start to unlock things through your own intuitive movement. Another way to do it would be through the use of mudra. So this is hand gestures, and I use this a lot because actually when we use mudras, we're actually manipulating the entire prana through the whole body. So that's the life energy that flows throughout the entire body. So would you like to try something with a mudra?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we're going to use this particular gesture where you bring the tip of your thumb and the tip of your first finger together. That's it. And you just let the other fingers be free as they will. Now, we use this mudra to represent the quality of air, the element of air, which is all about freedom. It's all about freedom. So just let your arms flow and float and become aware of your breath as you're moving with this hand gesture. Become aware of your breath moving freely. If you wish to close your eyes, you can. And allow your body to be filled with this sense of freedom. Notice how your internal state moves with the gesture. And you can continue moving and let your mind drop into your story in this state of freedom. And notice which aspects of your story reveal themselves. Okay, beautiful. How was that, Kylie?
Ooh, I liked it. Yeah. Super cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know that you also talk about too, and I'm curious just how this feeds into what you just said, which is that people kind of get bored with their story. So how does this embodiment approach kind of keep it fresh for them?
Right, absolutely. So this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. You know, if you're speaking, if you're doing a whole bunch of interviews, you're teaching over and over again. The embodiment piece, that I'm going to say there are two things. So the first is to do with preparing your body in the moment, because, you know, whatever else has been going on for you through the day, and now you've got to come and present. If I always recommend taking a couple of minutes before you start, treat it like a stage. I know, of course, I'm going to say that because that's my background, but it really, really works. If before you go onto the stage, you have your moment where you're standing, as it were, in the wings. And so the first thing to do is to literally to shake the body out. Just shake out. So you shake off anything that's kind of hanging on to you, any kind of stuckness. Then you want to get into your feet. So make sure your feet are firmly planted on the ground. And I recommend sort of just rocking backwards and forwards on your feet, right? So that you are firmly planted, but you also have that spring in your step. You really occupy space in a very, very different way if you have that spring in your step. So you're not sort of glued to the earth. You actually also have that counter-gravity ability available to you as well. And then after you've rocked back and forwards on your feet, take a few deep breaths in and out. So just let the breath flow through. And then finally, and this I think is probably the most important thing, is to get into your hips. If you speak from your hips, there's a rooted quality to your words that will make them land in a very, very powerful way in the ears of your audience. Okay, so a simple way to do that is a few hip rotations. Just simply allow your hips to rotate in both directions. It's important to go in both directions a few times. And then elongate the spine. That's also very important, because when we elongate the spine, we've got the spinal fluid moving much more freely. And so again, your whole body becomes available to you in a much more free-flowing way if you do that. So to come back to your question about how to not get bored with your story, if you do those preparatory exercises in the wings, you are now much more present. And when you're present, even if you're telling the story for the 1008th time, it will be absolutely fresh. And I know that for sure, because when we train in classical Indian dance, we do this exactly the same basic steps over and over and over again. And there's this particular performance piece that's the first performance piece that we do. I would have performed that thousands of times in my life. I can tell you, if I do that right now, it's as if I'm doing it for the first time. It feels totally fresh. And the only reason for that is that I am fully embodied. So the same goes for your words, because your words are an extension of the body. When I'm telling my story about choosing to complete my marriage and get that divorce, when I'm very present in my body, I'm able to inhabit each cadence of the story in this moment. That's the key. It's being in this moment. Yeah,
I love that. And it's kind of interesting because I've been doing a little bit of yoga. I did a lot of yoga maybe 20 years ago. I was living in Singapore and had this Indian teacher, and everybody would be like, yoga's so beautiful and calming. And my yoga teacher was like Iyengar trained. She was brutal. It was like an hour and a half. And she used to, I was like probably the least flexible person in her class. And I was really painful. But more recently I took a little, I'm doing some yoga now. And, you know, like as a tall person, reaching my toes is actually quite difficult. And I saw this, you know, this neuro hack online, and it showed me how to bounce up and down and look look forward. And it did something with my brain. And then I was able to like all of a sudden squat down and do something that, you know, it's like 30 seconds before I wasn't. I was like, wow, that's like really interesting how there's all these like this neuroscience behind a lot of the movement. I think some of what you're talking about before you go on stage, it triggers different parts of our brain. So we go out there and we have a different presence. And I know you talk about the neuroscience of conscious movement. Could you share a little bit more about how you look at the neuroscience of the work you do and how that impacts people?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'll probably get up and demonstrate actually a couple of movements for this in a moment. But the first one I'll do is seated. And it's all about the neuroscience of symmetry. So one of the things that affects our presence, the quality of our presence, and our ability to be aware and to project is this sense of coherence in the brain. When the right and the left halves of the brain are working together, then we come into a whole brain state. And when you're in a whole brain state, that's very powerful. It's a very creative state. You're also completely present, and you have this sort of open vision. It's literally like your vision expands. So one way in which to do that is simple, symmetrical movement. Simple, symmetrical movement. And we can do it just with the head. So again, let's do this all together now. Just make sure that your feet are flat on the ground. So if you're wearing heels, take them off. It's really important that the sole is flat. You can sit cross-legged if you want, but you don't need to for this. Make sure your spine is comfortably upright, and just rock a little bit from side to side on your sit bones so that you're aware of the seat and you're aware of the two halves of the body. And let your shoulders unlock. So you can just rotate your shoulders gently backwards a couple of times. And now look straight ahead of you at eye level. And then you're gently going to turn your head from side to side. Just gently turn the head from side to side. So you're looking from one shoulder over to the other shoulder. And let your attention fall into the back of your neck as you keep that movement going. See if you can slow the movement down. Really let your attention fall back, so back into the back of your head. And as you keep that movement going, let your eyes close. If you need to sigh, go ahead and do that. And when you're ready, gently come back to the front. So if you open your eyes now and look straight ahead of you, but let your awareness come back here, sort of back into the back of your head. Do you notice any difference? You do? What's the difference that you notice?
I do. Well, you're talking about the left and the right side being more balanced, and I definitely feel that. I think like my body's a little bit asymmetrical at times, just with different spinal stuff that I have going on. And so it was cool for me just to feel in a minute or 2 minutes or however long that was to get that balance, especially just being aware of it in the way that I'm sitting is really cool.
Mm.
for me, I kind of feel like I'm leaning back a little bit more, almost like before I was maybe my consciousness was like in front of me, you know, it wasn't quite like settled in myself, you know, but
Yeah.
now that there's a little bit more attention on the back, then it kind of puts the front and the back in balance, you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting, that, isn't it? And I think that so, speaking to the neuroscience of it, it's literally bringing both halves of the brain, and in fact, the entire spinal cord. So the whole nervous system on both sides, they're now speaking to each other so that they are in coherence. And so you've literally changed the neurology there. We've literally changed that sense of balance. So that is a way of using conscious movement, this sort of intentional movement of the body, in order to change your brainwave state and to change what becomes available to you in that moment. So I wanted to show you a couple of other things. So I'm going to get up and demonstrate now, so that you can watch, you can join in.
Okay, and if you're listening to this on audio on iTunes or Spotify, then check us out on.
Right?
Check us out on YouTube.
Can you hear
we
me?
can hear you. Yep. Yes.
Okay. So if you stand up with your feet about hip distance apart, and we're going to sway gently from side to side. So you're just going to rock from one foot over onto the other. And try and keep your spine straight. So you don't want your neck, don't overextend the neck, keep the neck straight. So you're literally just shifting the weight from one side to the other. And let your hands and your arms just rest by your side. Keep your eyes open and keep your eyes at eye level. And let your gaze become soft. So you're not really looking or focusing on anything. You're just letting the eyes take in whatever they happen to take in. And just notice what you notice in your body, maybe in your brain, in your head, maybe in your hips, maybe in your feet. And see if you can slow the movement down. Really be aware of your feet and the rocking. Okay, wonderful. When you're ready, you can bring that to a close. I just want to do one other thing with you, a beautifully simple movement for you to experience that shift and that bringing of symmetry and coherence into the body. But I wanted to do something that also allows you to experience connecting with an inner state and cultivating that inner state. So we're actually going to... Okay, let's use the same mudra that we used before. So this hand gesture for air. So that's the tip of the thumb and the tip of your first finger joined together, and the other fingers just spread out as they are. And allow your arms and your hands to move freely. This sense of freedom. Allow that sense of freedom to start to flow through your entire body. And you're going to now follow your hands. So keeping the hands in that hand gesture. Let your hands move and let your body follow by moving completely intuitively. Let your body intuitively follow the movement of your hands. Freedom. So you're allowing your body to express itself in this context of freedom. What does freedom feel like to your body right now, in this moment? And if you were to speak about your origin story right now with this sense of freedom, how would that feel? Keep letting your body move. You're moving into your story with the sense of freedom. Okay, beautiful.
I love that you just took us through a process, and I'm super curious how it's played out with your clients. Like, I feel like we've just gotten a really cool experience of what it's like to work with you. And I know what it's like for people when they show up on my doorstep there. They have so many stories and they don't know which one to use, or they feel like nobody cares about their story, or they feel like they don't have one, right? It's the opposite side of the spectrum. I don't have one, or I have so many, I have no idea which one to pick. So, how does everything you're sharing with us today kind of address some of those issues with people? Like, how do they show up at your door and how do they leave?
Thank you so much for this question. So they show up often with this sense that they really have something important to share. So usually when people come to me, they know they've got something important to share. But there is this question of how do I speak? What exactly do I say? Who am I speaking to? And kind of which bits should I share and which bits should I not share? You know, how do I make sense of my own story in the context of what's important to other people? And here's the thing about conscious movement. So the pieces that I've just worked with you through, especially the movement around air, is part of a methodology that I created actually during lockdown, which is called 5-element dance. So we work with the 5 cosmic elements of earth, water, fire, air, and akasha, or space. And I use those. It's incredible. I mean, it is honestly incredible. The results that people get when we use those elements and moving through those elements to drop into their story. Because here's the thing, what we're really dropping into is the truth of your body. And there is something so potent about the truth of the body because the body is undeniable. So when we use the conscious movement of the body to connect with our story, what happens is that people are able to find the threads that are like the core threads that really want to come up, and the strongest threads that are unbreakable. And by holding on to those threads and starting to weave those, what happens is that they're able to cast this tapestry out, and it is always caught very, very easily and readily by the people who are waiting to hear your story.
I love that. Could you maybe share how a story would differentiate between, say, 2 of the different elements?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Or could you tell a story and to one audience or be like, I'm going to give you some fire here. And then other audiences, you might take a bit more of a yin approach and be like, I need to use more water energy here. And that's a little bit of a different thing than what you're teaching, I know, but I'm kind of curious if you can integrate those 2 concepts together.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love this. So let's use my story that I shared with you about choosing to complete my marriage and get the divorce. So if I'm wanting to bring that sense of clarity, then I will really go into that fork in the road moment. That fork in the road moment where I just had to decide. I'd spent sort of 2 years, I think, pretty much going through this absolute turmoil of, should I stay? Well, I really want to stay now. I have to stay, but I'm slowly dying over here. Okay. So then I'll really go into that particular part. And the vocabulary, I've noticed, will change. I've mentioned vocabulary before. Different kinds of vocabulary will become available to me when I start thinking about the story from that perspective. Now, the exact same story, if I want to speak about self-care, for example, and the need to really look after ourselves and tend ourselves, I might go more into the part of the story where, I had told my parents, and they had a really, really bad reaction. And I remember having this conversation with my mother on the phone, and I came off that phone conversation and I felt completely annihilated, is the only word that I can use, because she just didn't know how to handle it. So the next morning I went to sleep in a state of annihilation, and I woke up the next morning still with just feeling annihilated. And I had to go into the dance studio that day. I was going to work with another choreographer. And I remember getting ready, and I was taking my video camera. This was before the days of smartphones. So I actually had a video camera and a tripod, and I put it all in my backpack and carried. I remember the weight of that backpack on my back, taking each step into the studio. And I remember standing in the dance studio with this sense of annihilation, knowing that I needed to be very, very careful and tender with my body, with my movement, and with myself. Right? So that's a different way. Can you see? So that with that kind of tenderness and self-care, if I'm trying to bring that out for somebody, I would usually go into the earth element, because the earth element is the womb. And it's also that sense of plenitude. It's that knowing that everything is actually available, even if I can't see it right now. And that knowing that you can go into that womb space, into that very quiet, into the dark, into that withdrawal, into that holding of self. So, and if I wanted to go into the freedom piece, this extraordinary roller coaster that I went on in the next year, having incredible time, eating loads of food, having lots of sex, having an amazing time, then I would go into the water element, and I would take somebody into the water element, and that sort of free flowing, like the whirlpool or the enormous waves, or just that tiny, very precise droplet of sensation. So yeah, the elements honestly are amazing. They are an endless, endless gift. And when people come to work with me in this way, it's just like opening gift after gift after gift out of the same story.
I love that. I was just at a retreat with this group of women called the Grandmothers of the Sacred We, and it's Hopi and Maori and Sufi elders, and they had us make a temple to every single element. The only difference is, instead of Akasha, they called it ether. So we made it, and we also made a temple to darkness and the full moon. And so we made 7 temples all over this gorgeous property, and then we had to sit in them for 5 minutes each while everybody else held space. It was really transformative. It was my favorite day of the entire retreat. I really enjoyed it. And so I hope that people listening will take you up on really spending some time with that. It's so important. And we're made up of all the elements, so it's like so deeply rooted in the body. Everything is made out of those 5 elements. Now, you've given us so much wisdom today. You've given us so many steps that we can take, and people who've studied story with me and listened to other story elements, they have this whole new dimension to add to it. So I really do hope everyone listening that you do go through and you do those movements and take that time if you didn't do it the first time around. Is there anything else that we didn't cover today that you would want to impart upon our listeners?
I think the main thing that I've just been sitting with a lot over the last couple of years is that it is so important for good people to come forward and share our stories. And the reason is this, that we're living at a time that is actually kind of in between stories at a global level. You know, we are right now all together shaping a future story, and we are in chaos at the moment. We are that in that in-between space. And so every time we step forward to share stories of freedom and togetherness and joy and nourishment, we are literally weaving the fabric of the collective global story. So for all of you listening to this, if you are having any kind of hesitation about coming forward with your story, please know that if you do work that creates coherence in the world, we need your voice and we need your story.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Vena, for being part of the Conscious Marketer podcast and also getting your work out in the world and helping to help other people get their work in the world and be more embodied. I think the world definitely needs more of that too. How can people find out about your work to follow up with you?
So probably the best place is on Instagram. I'll give you guys the link. So it's vena.ramphal. And there's a link tree there with the different offers that I have. But in particular, I'd probably point podcast listeners in the direction of the offer that's called Release. So if you've been inspired and you're ready to release your story, or you're ready to release any inhibitions that you have about sharing it, please come and check that out.
All right, great. Yeah, and we'll post those links. You can find those links at consciousmarketer.com/podcast. Just look for Vena's episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, which many of our listeners do, and you want to see Vena's movements, you can also search Conscious Marketer YouTube. And we do have a YouTube channel. We're going to be expanding that next year. Thank you so much, Vena, for being part of our podcast today.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy and pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye for now, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.